Today, I want to share a story with you from a fellow rider named Stephen Oliver. Now, Stephen is from the UK, and he spent a good part of his life busy with work, as many of us do. He also did what a lot of people do with motorcycling. He started riding at an early age, then got sidetracked, and then came back to it later on. He's got quite an interesting story that I think you get a lot of chuckles out of when you hear this. The ride, though, that we're talking about today is a recent adventure that Stephen took from the UK down to the sunlit roads of southern Spain and then all the way to the Arctic edge of Europe. Now, this trip is really inspired by a extremely poorly chosen gift that Stephen bought for his wife that turned out to be, well, unpopular with his wife, uncomfortable to deal with, yet in the end, an incredible adventure that's fueled him for even more. We're also going to talk about some great riding areas that he's discovered along the way that you may not be aware of. Anyway, I'm Jim Martin. This is Adventure Rider Radio. Stay with us. We got a good one for you. Best Rest Products is the maker of the Cycle Pump, the best tire inflator for motorcyclists. You can inflate a flat tire in less than 3 minutes. Is founded, assembled, and warranted for life in the USA. They're also the inventor and retailer of the combination tire iron / wrench, the Hex Wrench. CyclePump.com.
I'm Sam Manikin. Simon. Boston Vince. Simon Pavey. Helge Pedersen. Charlie Bowman. Chris Birch.
Elizabeth Martin.
Jocelyn Snow.
Quentin Smote, and you're listening to Adventure Rider Radio.
And Green Chili Adventure Gear offers American-made, heavy-duty luggage systems for all types of motorcycles. You can turn any dry bag into luggage using their strapping system. And, of course, Green Chili Adventure Gear is tested in extreme weather and terrain to withstand the abuse that adventure riding gives it. Tough, reliable gear. GreenChiliADV.com. It's wind pressure that powers the Moto Breeze chain oiler. No electrical or vacuum connections. It delivers the oil to a felt pad on your swing arm. No nozzles near your sprockets. 1 ounce of oil gets 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers. Get more miles from your chain and sprockets. MotoBreeze.com.
I am Stephen Oliver. I'm from Derbyshire in England. I am a sort of semi-retired brewer, and I'm an author, blogger, and motorcycle adventurer.
Stephen, welcome to Adventure Rider Radio.
Thank you very much for having me, Jim. Looking forward to talking to you.
Where are you sitting right now?
Well, actually, it's a flat, and it's in Mallorca, in the Balearic Islands in Spain, and that's where I am at the moment. So it's a top floor penthouse flat, so I've got a nice view of the sea, but that's where I am. I'm in Mallorca.
So why are you in Spain?
I've got a holiday home here, and I've come out actually to try and escape a bit of the worst of the British winter because it's just been unremittingly dull. And also during the winter, there's always 1 or 2 jobs to do around the flat. So that's why I'm out here with my wife, who's gone out shopping now. And in the summer, of course, when I can, I bring the motorbike over here, which is, one of the adventures that I had that I've no doubt we'll talk about. But so mixture actually. I come by road, but most of the time I come by air. It's just that bit more practical.
Stephen, how many languages do you speak?
3 really. 4 if you include English, obviously. I'm told I speak English. I speak French, I speak German, and I speak a bit of Spanish as well.
So why all these languages?
Well, I studied languages at university. It was one of the few things I was good at school, so I was quite quick at picking up French and German, and I went on to university to read those as well. And then when we bought our place here in Mallorca back in, when was it, 2004, I obviously started to learn Spanish. I have to say, the older you are when you learn a language, the more difficult it is. So my Spanish is not as good as I would like it to be, but I enjoy speaking it. And it's one of the ways in which, when I'm on my travels, I enjoy the opportunity to communicate with people where I am in their language. It sort of adds a different dimension, I think, to the travels. But I do think, and people say this, don't they, that as you get older, there are lots of ways in which you can exercise the grey matter. And for me, learning and practicing a language is part of it. If I go anywhere like Norway or Sweden, where I don't know the language, even though, by and large, they speak good English there. Not everywhere, but most places they do. It's always nice to have a few phrases. It helps to break the ice, even if it's only knowing, how to ask for a couple of beers in a bar.
So tell me, when you're traveling, like for instance, like when you go to Germany, does knowing some German, being able to speak fluently or semi-fluently, whatever command you have of the language, does that, do you think, help with your trip, your motorcycle trip, for instance? Or could it take away? Because I'm wondering, because there's some sort of magic about trying to understand and having some barrier that you have to try and cross with someone. But does that help or does it take away from that? What do you think?
Oh, no, I think it definitely helps. And yeah, no question. I mean, I love the opportunity to go and talk to somebody in their language, even if it's faltering and even if I, kick myself because I used to know that word and now I can't remember it and I'm not as fluent as I used to be. But no, I think generally speaking, people do appreciate the fact that that you're making an effort in their language. But for me, on my travels, definitely enjoy it. It's a way of having contact with locals that otherwise, perhaps wouldn't exist. And also, of course, occasionally, if I find myself in a bit of a scrape, when I had some gear stolen in Bremen in Germany, it does help if you can actually talk in German to the cops, or the Polizei.
Right. Yeah, that's the opportunity, or that's the situation rather, where you being able to speak the language, the better you can speak it, the better off you are. And also that, that wasn't such a major thing. If you had been arrested for something, that would be seriously handy to have a handle on the language. There's no doubt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I have a simple rule there: just don't get arrested.
Does it work for you?
Well, so far so good. I've managed to avoid it up
so
to
you're
now.
either really slippery or very careful. Could be one or the other.
A bit of both, actually.
Why does your wife call you an adventure pony?
I don't know whether that's a phrase that she invented or whether she picked it up somewhere else. But I just do different things. So when I was a bit younger, I used to do a lot of mountaineering. Actually, rather selfishly, really, because I was working away a lot during the week, and then at the weekend I'd clear off up into the mountains of Scotland and go and do the Munros, which is a pretty well known, certainly in the UK anyway, group of mountains. There are 283 of them in total, over 915 meters high, which is 3,000 feet.
Wow.
And there's a sort of sport of ticking them off, doing them, bagging them, tick them off, move on to the next one. They are actually spread all over Scotland, and some of them are pretty inaccessible. So it did take me 25 years to do it. So that was part of the adventure ponying. But then I learned to fly, and then became a flying instructor part-time. Used to fly microlights, and then bigger stuff, Cessnas, Pipers, and then the motorcycling and push biking, cycling. So anything that involves a degree of risk and adventure and fun and outdoors is me. And so that's the adventure pony bit. Oh, by the way, on the language front, we were talking about languages earlier. She is Welsh. Judith is Welsh, and she is learning Welsh, which, if you've ever come across the Welsh language, is just the most impenetrable language out. I mean, it's like it's all consonants. There are hardly any vowels.
Well, give me an example.
Oh, well, I'd have to look it up on my phone, but I think it's in the Guinness Book of Records, actually, that I can't look it up on my phone. It's switched off.
No. I was thinking the same thing. We just switched your phone off. No, yes. I'm saying you give speak in the language and give me a sentence.
Iachidar, diolch, Kelvar, Kuru. Kuru is beer, by the way. I mean, that is one word I definitely do know. Dŵr. And there's a railway station in North Wales. I was at it actually fairly recently. It's known colloquially as Llanfair PG, but actually its name is about 26 letters long. It's the longest place name and station name probably in the world, certainly in Europe.
Wow.
And it's quite an art to pronounce it.
So say it again.
Well, Llanfair PG is the actual name of the station.
Llanfair PG in my
Llanfair PG. Yes, I found the station. So here we go. This is the Llanfair PG. The actual name of the place is Llanfair Pwlgwyn Go Gerwn Chwendrob o Llandosglilio Gogogoch.
Oh, now when you say it that way, yeah.
That's just one place.
Stephen, that's impressive that you even managed to pull that off in one shot, too. One go.
Yeah, no practice.
I wanted to go back here because you did mention that you're sort of semi-retired from brewing. What sort of brewing were you doing?
For many years, actually, about 40 years in total. I worked in the brewing and pub industry in the UK. And I started up in Edinburgh with a company called Scottish and Newcastle in marketing, actually, working on a couple of the big brands, one of which was Beck's Beer, German beer. And then I moved down to the Midlands, where I am now, to work for a company called Marston's. But my ultimate boss at Marston's, Ralph Findlay, who was the chief executive, is my riding buddy. He was with me on the section from the UK to Norway. That's Ralph. That is the Ralph. Ralph was my boss, and I left Marston's in 2013. Went to go do my own thing. I set up an executive coaching company, helping to train and develop people. But for the last 15 years, I've been a non-exec director and deputy chairman of a small family brewer in the east of England, in Lincolnshire, called Bateman's. And I'm still on the board there. Lovely little business, not very big, about 50 pubs, small brewery. And it's a really nice business to be involved with, very friendly. Been going now last year, it celebrated its 150th anniversary, which is quite something, actually. Quite something.
Talk about your Honda C90. How did you end up with a Honda C90?
Oh, the original one.
When I left
you, yeah, it was my first ride. Yes, that's right. Yeah, lovely. It was, classic bike, of course. Millions of them sold worldwide. Mine was a blue and white one. I can see it now. I bought it from a dealership in Stoke-on-Trent. First bike I'd ever had. I was terribly proud of it. Rode it home, and we had I was living with my parents at the time, and we had a very narrow drive, and I rode it down the drive, and I accidentally crashed it into my dad's garage. So fortunately, didn't do the garage or me or the bike too much damage, but it wasn't a particularly auspicious start. He was a bit nervous about me having a bike anyway, and that didn't settle his nerves at all. But how I came to have it was I was offered a job straight from uni, and I thought that I was going to get a company car straight away. The job came with company car, etc., fantastic. So I turn up on my first day, fully expecting to go driving away in a brand new whizzy company car. And what I hadn't spotted in the small print, there's a pattern developing here, as you'll realize, read the small print, was that the company car only came after 6 months probation. So there was no way of me doing the 10 miles a day by public transport. So I'd got to find a way of doing it. And I didn't really want to go and buy my own car for the simple reason I hadn't got any money. Hence the bike. So I bought the bike, and it did 40 miles an hour flat out with a following wind, if you're lucky. And then at the weekends, I was going to see Judith, who was then my girlfriend. She lived in Burnley, which is about 120 miles or so away from where I was in Oxfordshire. And we would meet in Stoke in the middle, and I would go herring up the road, staying off the motorway, obviously, but on the dual carriageways, full throttle the whole way to see her for the weekend and then come back on a Sunday night. And after a very short period of time, the exhaust pipe turned completely blue because basically the bike had two modes. It was either off or it was full throttle. And anyway, but it kept me going. And I remember, actually, I think it was on my second day going into work on this bike, it was throwing it down with rain. And I've got some pretty rudimentary weather gear. And as you'll know yourself, of course, if you're in driving rain, there's a sort of pool of water that gathers in your crotch area on the saddle. And so I turn up in the office, bearing in mind, I'm a complete novice here. And I strip off this overlayer of rainwear and my trousers and my suit soaking wet. So I whip my trousers off and stick them on a radiator in this meeting room. And I thought I'd lock the door. and I'm standing there in my underpants, waiting for these trousers to dry out. And suddenly there's a rattle and the door opens and a whole bunch of people come in for a meeting. Anyway, I survived the probationary period, and after 6 months, I did get the brand new Ford Escort. And the bike then sat in the garden, going nowhere really, for probably another year or so. And then I decided, well, there's no point having a company car and a bike, so I sold it. And that was it really with biking for a long, long time. I didn't get back into it until much, much later in life, like a lot of people. But it was a very memorable first bike.
What got you back to the bike?
Well, I have a friend called Chris, and Chris, a dear friend from school. I've known him for over 50 years, and we get together from time to time. He's in Stratford-on-Avon, and I'd been playing golf with him here in Mallorca, and a few weeks after we got back, this was back in 2010, I think. Yeah, 2010. We got back and he had a stroke. Very sad. He's an incredibly fit guy. He had a stroke, but made an amazing recovery. But as part of his recovery, he decided, rather bizarrely, to buy himself a Vespa. And he thought that this would help him, practice his balance. I mean, I'm still not quite sure the logic of this, but anyway, this is exactly what happened. So he bought this scooter, 125 Vespa, but he found that he could only ride it in one direction. He could only ride it left. I can't remember left or right, but anyway, he could only go one way. If he tried to go the other way, make a right turn, it unbalanced him. He felt really quite queasy. Wow. He realised that this wasn't actually a particularly effective way of getting about, because it would be a very circuitous way, even if he just wanted to go down the road to the shops. So after
if you can only turn one way, yeah.
Yeah. Why are you over here? Well, I go exactly. So he stuck it in his garage and forgot about it. And then a few years later, he got back into golf, fortunately, and he'd said, he remembered that I'd had a motorbike, Honda T90 years ago, and he said, have you ever thought about getting back into it? Because I'm thinking of selling my Vespa. And I thought, funnily enough, I was thinking about getting back into biking. So I went to see it, and apart from gravel rash down one side of it, where he managed to drop it on one of his wobbly turns, it was pristine. So I bought it off him, only to discover that because it had sat in his garage going nowhere for so long, all of the fuel system had completely gummed up.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't really work very well. So between us, we sorted, he helped me pay for a new fuel system, stripped it all out. But it was never quite the same, because it was only a 125, so it wasn't very powerful. But even when you opened the throttle on that, it started to hunt. It would never accelerate or hold pace properly with full throttle. It would
frustrating.
And, it was a bit frustrating, really. So I sold that after about 6 months of deciding that this was really getting me nowhere. But actually, it had fired up my enthusiasm for biking. So At this stage, I thought, well, I quite like it, but I'll get a bigger scooter and maybe something I can actually go places on, possibly even ride out here to Mallorca. So I bought a Honda Forza 350, big scooter, well, big-ish scooter, and I hated it. It was really uncomfortable, incredibly bouncy. All your weight was on your butt. And so after a while, you got a numb bum. And it really wasn't up to the mark of going anywhere distant. So I swapped that and bought my first proper bike, which was a Honda NC 750 DCT, the dual clutch transmission. So it's an automatic, but you can override it. You can do it manually as well. And I loved that. It was my first proper bike, and I toured to Spain and France on that, came out to Mallorca, and I absolutely adored it. Great bike. And sold that then subsequently to buy the Honda NT 1100, which I'm just about to swap for another NT 1100. So I'm kind of dyed-in-the-wool Honda devotee now. But it was a Vespa that got me into riding, and Chris still ribs me about this every time I see it. How's the Vespa? I was like, oh, Chris, I did sell it, because it never went.
You've always used the automatic clutch. You've never had a bike with a manual clutch, strictly.
Well, until now, because the Honda, I mentioned that I'm getting a Honda GB350S, and that actually is very simple. It's just newly launched in the UK. It's been available in Australia and some of the Asian markets for a while, but it's only just come to Europe. And it's a single-cylinder, air-cooled 350 thumper.
Nice.
Manual, obviously. Beautiful, modern retro bike. I'm terribly excited about it, but it is a manual, so I'm going to have to learn to ride a manual bike.
Right.
I did think about putting my L plates on.
Well, the good thing is you already ride, so you've got the riding down. All you have to do is master the clutch. I suspect it will go fairly quickly for you. But I'm wondering about the DCT, because I think you said something about the DCT. You found the DCT sort of hunted when you were doing switchbacks?
Well, the DCT is a great piece of kit, and apparently the new one on the new 25 model year Honda NT 1100 is much better. They've done a number of things that improve its handling and tractability at low speeds, which is an area where it was a little difficult. I mean, it's a great piece of kit, and most of the NT 1100s, and I think a fair number of the NC 750s are actually sold in DCT guys as well, because the technology is good. But on switchbacks and hairpins, where you've got to use very fine clutch control to get that perfect balance of speed and lean angle, you have to use a bit of trail braking. So I got quite good at using trail braking with the throttle, because you've got no clutch control with a DCT. So you've got to find a really fine method of just managing that speed perfectly. And that's where trail braking comes in. Now, apparently the new one, particularly if you put it in rain mode, which is much more of a sort of soft riding mode, is even at low speeds much more sensitive. It's not so jerky on the throttle, because that was an issue with the other one, particularly in difficult areas. Like, for instance, I've done a lot of ferries across the Bay of Biscay, to go to northern Spain, but also, of course, in Norway, and over the North Sea. And when you're going on and off ferries on those metal, flat, often greasy, wet, slippery, tricky decks, you really want to be able to control the bike very, very gingerly indeed. And the DCT can be a tad tricky there, but only managed to drop it once on a ferry.
I use so much good. It was just interesting to hear those times when it's different. Like, the nice thing with the clutch is, and you're going to find this with a clutch, is that the moment you start to spin, with your back wheel starts to spin, you pull in the clutch and it's over. It's done. I don't know what this DCT handles like. I've never ridden one. I really need to get on one.
They handle great. I mean, obviously, I haven't really got much to compare it to, so I can't say that I've ridden a full manual equivalent of the NT or the NC. But in they do handle really well. I mean, for me as a rider, I think, because I drive an automatic. I mean, I can drive a geared car, obviously, but I drive an automatic car now largely out of choice, and also because it's quite hard to get a hold of a manual. It leaves you to concentrate completely on the road. So you don't have to think about what gear you're in. You just focus on the road, what's happening around you, the traffic, where you're going, all of those things which demand all of your attention. I know that obviously muscle memory and the fact that, managing the clutch, etc., becomes automatic. The more familiar you are with it, I get that completely. But it is great not to have to think at all about the what gear you need to be in. And again, the new version of the NT 1100 DCT has got the IMU system off the Africa Twin, which means that it won't do occasionally silly things like change gear in the middle of a bend, which the old one would do from time to time if you happen not to be in the right mode.
And you feel that when it changes gears?
You do, yeah. You can do, yes. And the last thing you want, if you're doing some very, very tricky hairpins, like the Trollstigen in Norway, for instance, you don't really want it to be changing gear in the middle of a tricky turn, because anything that upsets the balance of the bike is not great. Which is why I would often override it in those situations, and you can go fully manual using the flappy paddles on the handlebars.
Oh, I see. So you hold it in one gear, like it waits for you to shift it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there is an override, so it won't allow you to stall it. It won't allow you to over-rev it. But as long as your revs are, in a normal range, you can hold it in that gear. And often when it was in those sort of conditions where gear control was really important, I'd override it and I'd do it manually. But for normal riding, just stick it in drive, or, if you're in the mountains, I would, on, kind of normal roads, but not too terribly technical roads, I'd stick it in sport 1, 2, or occasionally 3, which gives you more engine braking. And you've got a lot of control over it. I mean, there are some people who kind of decry the DCT system, think it's a bit of a cheat, and don't really understand it. And I understand where they're coming from. But actually, if you've tried it, you'll probably stick with it because it is just so good. And more manufacturers now are starting to come out with automatic or semi-automatic systems. Yamaha with their YAMT, obviously BMW as well, and I know that will be more too. It's becoming more normal.
And you could, I understand when people say that it's sort of cheating. It makes perfect sense, but so is fuel injection. If you think about that, all of this technology we have is kind of cheating in a way. So it just depends on your perspective. But I think it could add some things to it. I often talk with the instructors about, what are they going to do when everything goes automatic? Because you can sort of see the manufacturers are leaning towards that. As you just mentioned, like with cars, it's difficult to find a standard, even though when you go to price a car out, I think, at least they were not too long ago, giving you the standard price, as in the manual transmission was the cheapest. You had to pay extra for the automatic, even though they don't make them with the manual transmission. You'd have to order it. So you can see manufacturers even doing that with motorcycles. They're tending to lean to that because that lowers the bar for entry for it. But who knows? There's pros and cons to both.
Well, the exciting thing both in the car industry but also in the motorcycle industry is there is constant innovation, and this is part of it. And I think if it enhances the riding experience, if it makes it safer, if it makes it more enjoyable, then that is a good thing, because you've always got the fallback if you really want to. You can go for a purely manual geared bike and so on. But I think for touring, the kind of, cruising riding, which I do in the main, having the slightly more laid back approach that you get from an automatic really helps. It makes it very relaxing. Well, as relaxing as some of the adventures can possibly be anyway.
Get trained, get outfitted, and get inspired to explore the world at Overland Expo SoCal. This March 15th and 16th at the OC Fair and Event Center in Costa Mesa, California. Overland Expo is a world-class event for overland enthusiasts. The SoCal event has over 250 top-tier vendors to build or outfit your motorcycle. You'll be inspired by authors, filmmakers, creators of all kinds, and world travelers that are hosting workshops, classes, and telling stories about their adventures on the road. Now, get your tickets in advance. Overlandexpo.com is a website. That's for Overland Expo SoCal, March 15th and 16th at the OC Fair and Event Center in Costa Mesa, California. Anytime you're dealing with them, tell them you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. Nobody does it like Overland Expo. Overlandexpo.com. The warmest and most comfortable mid-layer that I've ever tried is the Purley's Hugger. Now, the Hugger is perfect for motorcycle riding for a number of reasons, but honestly, it's perfect for any outdoor activity. It will outdo anything that you can buy on the market out there. It's made from 20% New Zealand possum fur, 70% merino wool, and 10% silk. This is ultra soft, lightweight, and compactable. I think it's like 10 ounces or 280 grams. It's made for motorcycle riding, literally. It's got a tall collar and a partial zip. It's knitted in one piece, so there's no seams to bunch up under your jacket. That's done on purpose. The merino wool and possum fur and the silk make the warmest mid-layer on the planet. But those natural fibers also prevent mold from growing under normal conditions, so it won't stink even if you've worn it for days underneath your jacket. The same fibers wick moisture away from your skin, and they retain heat even when they're wet. These are far better than anything you can buy on the market that's synthetic. PurleysPossumSocks.com is the website. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. PurleysPossumSocks.com. It's called the Purley's Hugger. The motorcycle camping store is Moto Camp Nerd. Moto Camp Nerd specializes and is dedicated to motorcycle camping. Everything in their brick and mortar store in Archdale, North Carolina has been thoughtfully chosen for pack size and durability specifically for motorcycle camping, according to Ben and Mary Williams, the founders of Moto Camp Nerd. They're authorized dealers for Big Agnes, Nemo, Sea to Summit, and more. Now, you can walk into their store and buy right off the shelf, or you can order online, and Ben and Mary say orders are processed within 24 hours, Monday through Friday. MotoCampNerd.com is the website. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here from Adventure Rider Radio. MotoCampNerd.com. And by the way, if you're having trouble figuring out what you want in your kit for motorcycle camping, they're quite willing to help you sort out what will work for your style. So make sure you get a hold of them. MotoCampNerd.com. Well, let's talk about some of your adventures. First of all, why do you ride a motorcycle to travel?
Why be a rider motorcycle travel? Well, as opposed to what, going in the car or?
Well, any other method, yeah. I mean, especially with you, because you have lots of background here. I mean, you've been into flying and you've been into a bunch of different things, especially hiking in the mountains. Why decide to swing your leg over a motorcycle?
Well, one of the reasons is because the very legs that I now swing over a motorcycle and used to take me up the mountains are starting to fail. I'm actually sitting here with a bandage on my right knee. I had a total knee replacement in November of last year.
Oh, geez.
Well, we're getting there. It's an interesting process, actually, and everyone had said this is quite a long road, and it certainly is proving to be.
You're talking about the process of the knee replacement, not the process of life.
Both, but no, the process of knee replacement.
Right.
I abused my body a bit, really, because I did a lot of marathon running and half marathons, and then I did all of this mountaineering and skiing, and I've used it, and I gradually got arthritis in my knees, and I got to the stage last year where I wasn't sleeping. It was really very painful. Both knees are bad, but my right knee was much worse than my left. So I decided now's the time. So I had my leg operated on in November. I'm just over 3 months after that, and the first few weeks were pretty tough, quite painful. And uncomfortable. You have to do an enormous amount of PT, physiotherapy, which I still do. And things are definitely improving, but I still call it the knee, not my knee. It doesn't quite feel mine at the moment. It's very prone to swelling. Doesn't like sitting in the car for terribly long, or indeed sitting, at a desk. So I'm sort of resting my leg out while we're talking here, just to try and stretch it a bit. But I am back on the bike, and that was obviously one of the driving forces. I wanted to get my fitness and strength and range of movement in my leg back so that I could swing a leg over the bike and ride it again. And I still climb mountains, and I want to get up into the hills, but I've done a lot, and, I'm not as young as I was. And at some point, other adventures begin to take over. And that's partly where the motorbike thing came in, because I love travel. I love seeing new places. I love history, culture, getting close to nature as well when you're out and about in the mountains. And motorbiking, as distinct from, say, car travel, is a great way of doing it. You can do it obviously by bicycle as well, but these days I ride an e-bike as opposed to a push bike, simply for my knees. And you can't go as far unless you're mega fit, which I'm not, in the sort of time that I've got available to do these trips. And that's where the motorbike really comes in, because it allows me greater distances, but still that contact with the environment, that sense of being at one with your surroundings that you don't get in a car. And the excitement, the adventure that comes with it. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but I do actually like a bit of a thrill. I get that on a bike in a way I wouldn't get on a push bike, and I can't really get on two legs now. So this is filling that big adventure side hole in my life.
Right, not just for transportation, but because of the method of transportation. Because it's obviously easier, but there's some excitement to it rather than a car.
Oh yeah, I mean that is the driving force for me. I mean, okay, I do occasionally use the bike for pure transportation, just to nip down to the shops or whatever. But my use of the bike is unashamedly for fun. So, I don't use it for commuting. So on my insurance policy, it's social, domestic, and pleasure only. It's not, business use. And it's my passport to fun.
Oh, I like that. Passport to fun. That's a good byline for one of the manufacturers to pick up. Now, if they do after this, you'll know where it came from. But
absolutely. I'm just writing it down, trademarking that one.
That's right. You do that now. Have you ever done any traveling on a bicycle, like a push bike?
By push bike, yes, yeah. When I was young, a stripling, a teenager, my other very good friend Tim, who I also knew from school. Tim, Chris, and I played golf together. But Tim and I did a bike ride to St David's in South Wales, which is about as far as you can go in South Wales. And we cycled it, staying in youth hostels the whole way. We took about 10 days to do it. And we had great fun. When you're about 16, that sense of adventure that you get from going on a bike and getting away from mum and dad is really intoxicating. And then a few years ago, we replicated it, rather fatter and older, but on rather sleeker bikes, still push bikes, but we did do it. But unfortunately, Tim's knees went very near St David's, so we had to get picked up by our respective other halves in the car to finish the ride off, which I think there's a kind of metaphor for life in there somewhere. You can still do the things that you used to do, but you need a bit more help.
And you may need to get rescued.
Yeah, you may need to get rescued.
I'm curious about the difference in the experience. Now, I know it was a long time ago for the push bike, but when you ride on your motorcycle now, and you've said this before, the interaction you get with people because they're interested in what you're doing. You're packed up on your motorcycle, you're riding somewhere. I'm wondering, do you think that's the same if you're on a push bike, or more or less?
Well, if I can remember back that far, yeah, it is the same. I mean, of course, the adventures come in different ways. If you're on a push bike and you're having those sort of adventures as a teenager, I mean, it's all new, isn't it? Everything is exciting and fresh, and even being able to, sneak into the local pub underage, that's all an adventure. And the prospect of meeting girls. I mean, my goodness, that used to keep me going on my bike. I tell you, when I was faced with a slog up a hill, the idea that there might be a girl in a youth hostel at the end of the rainbow was one of the things that kept us going. And actually, there is a story there, Jim, because I did meet my wife, Judith, the Welsh one, in a youth hostel in the Lake District.
Did.
I wasn't on the bike. We were walking actually, not on a bike. But that's where we met many years ago when we were 16.
I was just going to poke fun at you saying the prospect of meeting a girl at the hostel when you get there, and I'm sort of chuckling as you're saying it in my mind, thinking, yeah, but it probably always ended up as a 0 for you, but no.
Yeah, well, there were lots of zeros. That was true.
Of course.
But you only need one, and I found one. Oh, I'm still with her, and it's 50 years later. We've been married for this year. I better get this right. Actually, we've been married for 44 years this year. So yeah, we're still going strong.
What sort of adventures have you done with your motorcycle?
I've ridden through France, over the Pyrenees, in Spain, down to Mallorca. I've ridden all over Spain to most of the major cities. This year, Ralph and I are going to go somewhere we've not been before. So we're going through northern Spain, which I've done before. He hasn't. But then we're going to go all the way down through Portugal. And we're going to the westernmost point of mainland Europe, a place called Cabo de Roca, which is not far from Lisbon. It's as far west as you can get on the mainland. Obviously, you've got the Canary Islands, which are part of Europe, but we'll kind of ignore them for a minute because you get your feet wet going to them. So we're going to go to the westernmost point of Europe. And the reason for that is because I have done the trip to a place called Tarifa, which is in Andalusia, southern Spain, directly opposite Morocco. It's on the Straits of Gibraltar, and it's the furthest point south in the mainland of Europe that you can get to. And I did that in 2022. So if I do Cabo de Roca this summer, that'll be 2 of the cardinal points. But there's a third I got as well. And 2023, Ralph and I went to Nordkapp, which is the most northerly point of mainland Europe that you can get to, right up in the very far north, well north of the Arctic Circle. Next stop, the North Pole, not that far from the Russian border. And so we went up there, we rode, we had a 3-and-a-bit-week trip all the way up to the north of Norway. And then we went to a place called Kirkenes, which is on the Russian border. It couldn't get any further. The border was closed, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then we worked our way back. So I've done 2 of the cardinal points of Europe, one more in the planning stage for this year. And then I'm now working on a cunning plan to go and do the most easterly point of mainland continental Europe, which is called Ilomantsi in Finland, and that will be in 2026. And as far as I know, I can't find any evidence to the contrary, but maybe one of your listeners will put me right here. I can't find any evidence that anyone has done all 4 of those points of Europe, Nordkapp, Cabo de Roca, Tarifa, and Ilomantsi, the easternmost point of continental Europe, before. So that will I think be a first, which I'm looking forward to doing.
You didn't contact Guinness?
No, I haven't yet. I'm not sure what their rules are.
Yeah, that's the thing. They're going to set up rules that you probably have to follow on it. So if you didn't contact them beforehand, it might be difficult.
Yeah, it probably will be difficult. I know that somebody would also argue the case, kind of correctly actually, that the Europe actually in the east doesn't finish until you're in the Urals, which is actually technically the case. So the easternmost point of Europe is where it meets Asia, but it's in the Urals in Russia. Well, for kind of obvious reasons, you can't go there now.
Right.
And Cyprus is in the EU. Cyprus is further east still, but of course Cyprus is an island, and so since I kind of exclude the islands from this particular quest, I've defined my easternmost point as being the bit of Europe that you can get to by land. that is the most easterly. And in fact, the border with Russia is on an island in the middle of a lake. And the border that you are allowed to go to, as long as you've got permission, you have to get a permit, is a kind of wooden. I've seen a picture of it. It's a wooden signpost right by the side of this lake, which is only maybe a couple of 100 meters across, and the Russian border sits right in the middle. But that is the end of the game. You can't go any further than that. You're not allowed to.
How big of an island is this?
Oh, you could play football on it, but no more.
It's about that tiny
big.
Little island.
It's not. Yeah, it's a tiny island, and the Russian and the Finnish border posts are permanently positioned on the middle of the island, and that's it. That is the easternmost point of Europe. So you can't actually get physically to that point, but you can go as far as you possibly can do. And I reckon, a couple of 100 meters away from it, that I'll count that as done if I get there.
Did you choose this? Did you plan this in advance? This all the cardinal directions that you were going to get in Europe, or did you sort of stumble across it after making a trip?
Well, I'd like to say I planned it, exquisitely, had everything laid out, but no, actually sort of stumbled on it, really. What happened actually in 2022? I booked the ferry across from Portsmouth to Santander in northern Spain, and then a couple of weeks later, I'd booked the ferry across from Denia in southern Spain to Mallorca, where I was going to bring the bike over for the summer. But the bit in between, what I was going to do in Spain at the time, actually, I hadn't really got any plans. And that was slightly unusual for me because normally I have everything laid out, documents and big folders with all the itineraries and places I want to go and see and places I'm going to stay, all sorted. Now, on this particular occasion, I thought, no, do you know what? I'm going to throw caution to the wind and just go with the flow. So I came up with a slightly crazy way of doing it. And what I would do is I would choose 3 locations that took me broadly in the direction I wanted to head. I didn't really want to sort of turn tail and head northwards again by leaving it entirely to chance. So I'd choose 3 different locations that I could go to in that day and different sort of areas. And I'd ask somebody to pick. So I'd write them down on a piece of paper and get them to pick. And there was a chap on the ferry over from Portsmouth. I met this chap called Norman, who was actually South African, but he lived in Kent in England. And I gave him these 3 pieces of paper and stuck them in a wine glass and asked him to pull it out. And he pulled out Segovia, which is a beautiful place in northern Spain with a fantastic viaduct. And so that's where we went. And then the next place I went to, somebody else chose. And gradually I sort of worked my way down. And then as I was doing it, I thought, do you know what? It'd be quite nice to go as far south in Spain as you can possibly go. And Tarifa. So I ended up in Jerez, where sherry comes from. And I cheated. So I decided rather than give the next choice to anyone, I was going to go to Tarifa. So I broke my rule and went to Tarifa, and then carried on along the coast and eventually got the ferry back to Mallorca from Denia. So it was to a large extent, it was serendipity that dictated the routes. And actually that was great fun because it was a bit uncomfortable at first because I like things planned, I like having everything laid out, but actually it was great to sort of throw caution to the winds and just go where somebody else had decided I should go until I got to that point where I arrived in Tarifa. And then having done the southernmost point, the idea of going to the north really began to appeal. But there was another factor, and that is that I'd booked a trip for my wife and I on the Hurtigruten ferry. Now I don't know whether you know the Hurtigruten, Jim, but it's actually a fundamental part of the Norwegian transport system. It's a coastal ferry system. Actually, there are about 8 ships, I think, can't remember the exact number, that are constantly plying over 1,000 miles up and down the Norwegian coast, calling at 32 ports, I think it is. Many of them very small, very out of the way places on the coast of Norway. Mm-hmm. and it's a lifeline. It is an absolute lifeline for the people who live there. But you are able to go on these boats as a passenger, and I
as a
booked
tourist,
this
you mean?
trip. As a tourist, yes, that's
Yeah.
right. I mean, so it helps subsidise the cost of this ferry system. And the boats they're not cruise liners by any means, but they're also not sort of rusty hulks that are just real workaday ferries. They're a bit more than that. They're very comfortable, very very good food, extremely good staff on board. But there's no fancy frills. They are great, and I'd seen an offer in the paper, and I thought it'd be really nice to do this, to see the Northern Lights. So I booked this surprise trip for my wife and me to go in December on the Hurtigruten, all the way along the coast for 12 days. 6 days up, 6 days back.
So this is a birthday present that you're presenting to your wife that you went ahead and clandestinely put together. Right.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And have I got a surprise for you, dear? This is where we're going. Anyway, she didn't really think much of it, really. And then nearer the time,
I think you got to get a little more detail there. So you said to her, you told her what it was, and what did she say?
Well, I think she thought I was joking. And the reason why I think she thought I was joking is because, one, she's not sailor. She hates boats. I've never been able to persuade her to go onto any kind of cruise at all. She also hates the cold, and Norway in the winter is very cold, and so it's cold. It's a boat, so it's wavy. It's very dark because Norway in the winter never gets light, and because it's winter as well. When you land in these places,
let me jump in here because I think the dialogue was more like this. So your wife says, so let me get this right. You've booked us on a 12-day cruise. And you say, yes. And she says, and this cruise is in Norway. You say, right again. And then you said you felt like you were off to a poor start. And she says, I hate ships and sailing. I get seasick. And we're going.
You're reading the book, aren't you?
I'm reading from your book. And she says, and when are we going? And you say, December. And she says, and it's warm and sunny in Norway in December. And you say, no, not exactly. No. And I think what you came back with was, well, she said, of course it isn't, you idiot. It's freezing dark and miserable. And you said, well, the ship's nice and it's got good seafood. You like shellfish.
Yeah. That is actually the long and short of it.
That's hilarious. It's just hilarious. And it's a typical wife saying to the husband again, you just don't pay attention to what I like.
Yeah, I know. I'm blushing, actually. as you remind me of this calumny, I am blushing.
Get serious about the control you have over your motorcycle by enhancing the connection between your boots and your foot pegs, by increasing the leverage you get over those pegs, and generally just having a more comfortable ride by switching to IMS Products foot pegs. IMS Products has a full line of adventure motorcycle foot pegs from large to small to cover anyone's riding style, and all of those pegs have been designed from the ground up to enhance our style of riding and enhance your control. They're all made of CAS certified 17.4 stainless steel. They all use a certified heat treating process. IMS pegs are built in the USA, and get this, they're warranted for life. The first modification I do when I get a bike is switch to IMS Products foot pegs because I know firsthand what these pegs do for me as a rider. They make me a far better rider, give me more control over the bike, and a more comfortable ride. IMSproducts.com is the website. Anytime you're dealing with them, throw in there that you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio. IMSproducts.com.
Yes, it was a rather stupid thing to do, wasn't it? But, I mean, if I was being terribly cunning, I would say actually it was all part of a master plan that ultimately had me and Ralph go there with our motorbikes. But actually, I'm not that clever. It was a stupid thing to do. But so what happened then is we agreed this was not very clever at all. So let's do it in the spring. where it would be at least lighter, so she could get off, see things, get off the boat, maybe a tad warmer as well. And then I think COVID happened, and so obviously that got pushed on. And then the following year, something else happened. And you may have had this experience where you just start to read the rules, and it's not going to happen. Yeah. It's not going to happen. She was not enthusiastic about it, and every time I broached the subject when I felt brave enough, I was getting nowhere. I'm sure there's a Welsh word for this. I must ask her what stupid idiot in Welsh is. But we were getting nowhere. So, but of course, I was faced with the possible loss of quite a substantial deposit, which I didn't really fancy. So I rang up Porty Groton and said, look, what's the score?
That's the company that you booked with.
That's the ferry company, right. And they said, well, we can't hold it open for you indefinitely. You're going to have to get off the pot and make a decision. So I went away and I had a brainwave. I said, do you take motorbikes? And said, oh yes, of course. So I then thought, well, actually, this could be the perfect solution. So if I take the bike up with Ralph, with Ralph, at that stage, I thought, I was just thinking to myself, if I take the bike up, I can then come back on the boat. And so out of that, the idea of going to Nordkapp was born. And then I rang Ralph, partly because Judith had said, it's a long way for you to go on the bike on your own. Isn't there somebody else that you can go with? And I said, well, I'm a bit Billy No Mates when it comes to riding. I generally speaking, ride on my own. I haven't really got lots of people that I go with. I'm quite happy, by and large, riding on my own. But he said, well, Ralph rides, doesn't he? So, yeah, it did. So anyway, I texted him. He's a very busy man because at that time he was the chairman of two major companies. And I knew he was very busy. And he texted me back. Actually, he said, "Oh, interesting idea. I'll just check." Anyway, following day, he texted, "You're on," and I couldn't believe it. That basically he cleared a whole month out of his diary, and within the space of a few hours, he was booked on it. I was booked on it. We were taking the bikes all the way up to Nordkapp and then on to Kirkenes, and we were then jumping on the boat and coming back. And so that then was the spawning of the idea of not only Tarifa, but to do Nordkapp as well. Now, in the end, Ralph couldn't join me for the Spanish bit because he was too busy. But so this summer, I've obviously done south to north, Tarifa to Nordkapp. He's done the Nordkapp bit, but he hasn't done the Tarifa bit. So after we've done Cabo de Roca, he's going to go down to Tarifa with me. So he'll have done the whole trip in reverse. So there's kind of a mirror image to this, which is great fun.
So I want to ask you more about this adventure, but before I do, I'm curious. Did your wife enjoy the birthday present?
I got her something else. We went on a very nice meal instead. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't just send her photos and a postcard and say, "This is your birthday present. Happy birthday. We're having a great time."
Oh, well, I did actually. I did send her that, but she's amazingly tolerant. Amazingly tolerant.
So this trip ended up being what 7,000 miles you did?
Yeah, in total we did. I did over 7,000 miles with the two trips, the Spanish one and then up to Norway. It was 7,000 miles, and that excludes the bit on the boat. So it was quite an adventure, really. Long way. So
7,000 miles of actual riding.
7,000 miles of riding. Because if you look at the coastline of Norway, it's a very, very long country indeed, and it arches over the top of Sweden and Finland as well, obviously right round to Russia. And the coastline itself is extremely convoluted. You've got all of these fjords that make riding anything other than straightforward. I mean, you could do it. There is a sort of inland route, the E6, I think it is, which you can do, which takes you through some very, very densely forested areas of Sweden all the way up to the north. But it's not a particularly interesting route. And the most beautiful way of doing it by a long chalk is to go up the coastal road. But of course, that that does take you literally the long way round. But it's exquisite. I mean, absolutely fantastic. And the whole adventure, the 7,000 miles with the Spanish bit and the Norwegian bit and all the countries in between, I think I did 10 countries in total, was just fantastic. It was absolutely outstanding, very, very memorable.
You mentioned about riding through Spain, and one thing that caught my attention was you said something about riding through Spain. I think you said sort of deserted Spain. Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's called in Spanish La España Vacía, and it's the sort of northern and middle part of Spain, which is incredibly deserted. There are relatively few people who live there. I mean, the Spanish population is less than the UK, but it's a landmass which is about 2.5 times or so greater. And the deserted Spain, you can ride literally for an hour or more. I mean, probably in the context of places like the United States, it's probably still relatively populated. But it is for Europe, which is a very densely populated continent, it is amazingly deserted. And in that part of the world, there's an area called Las Bardenas Reales, which is a bit like the desert in Arizona with these amazing rock formations. And it's just an exquisite riding experience, but a very lonesome one as well. So you've kind of got to be comfortable in your own skin to ride in that very inhospitable environment with very few people around and very few villages and towns that you're going to go through. But one of the other reasons why it's called España Vacía is that a lot of the young people there have left the small villages that are there to go and work in the big cities. And there's a big problem of depopulation in these rural areas.
So cheap real estate?
Well, it's very cheap real estate. Yeah, there are some places where you can buy property for next to nothing because the local authorities are so desperate to try and repopulate. But you've got to weigh that against the lack of infrastructure and so on. So, yeah, I mean, there are these societal issues which are affecting parts of Europe, and that middle area of Spain is part of it. But it's a beautiful part of the world as well. And I would, any of your listeners who want to go and find places like Castile and Leon and in the north of Spain, just getting the map out here, actually, I'd highly recommend it. Sorry about that. It's a great place to go and to tour. And then, of course, as you come further south, the temperature changes, the terrain becomes even more barren and harshly beautiful. But great riding as well, especially in the mountains.
What did you do for your gear for that? I mean, you're riding Nordkapp, which is cold, so you need a lot of warm gear, and then you're riding Spain, which is hot. What did you do with your gear?
The gear is a bit of an issue, actually. I mean, Nordkapp and Northern Europe is relatively straightforward because you've got to have gear which is going to cope with all circumstances, but primarily wet and windy weather, even in the summer. Although perversely, when we did Norway, it was incredibly hot. We were very lucky. We only had one day of real heavy rain. The rest of the time, it was extremely warm, unseasonably warm, actually.
Yeah.
But of course, when you go to Spain, it is very hot indeed. And I was in a little town in the south of Spain, south of Cordoba, and it was 42 degrees, which, when you're riding a motorbike is really, really warm. And it's quite tough, is that, because you cannot get cool. Even if you've got all of your gear open and letting air flow through, it's just so hot and quite distracting. So you've got to have frequent breaks, take a lot of water on board, and just make sure that you're trying to keep as cool as possible. But I take mesh gear, so I've got a whole range of gear that I take. And if I'm riding in Spain, when I know that the weather is going to be pretty warm. I'll take this lightweight mesh gear, still with all the protection, but it allows airflow. And then in the event that it does rain, I've got a set of rain covers that I can just throw on to keep the rain off. And then as soon as it stops, I whip them off again, because otherwise it's a bit like boiling the bag. You're going to bake very quickly.
Yeah. So can you talk about some of the unplanned things that happened to you on this trip?
Yeah, there were a few. And
because you said your preference is planned, right?
Yeah, preference is planned. But, I always reckon that the essence of adventure travel is the stuff that you haven't planned for. Adventure comes when things happen that you haven't actually expected to happen. And that might be the places you suddenly decide to go to, the people you meet, or the stuff that happens. And there was a bit of stuff that happened. I was in a place called Marchena, which is near Seville, just sort of northeast of Seville. And it was very hot. I'd been riding for a good while. It was pretty warm, and I came into this little town and decided I'd stop for lunch. And as soon as I stopped, I got my jacket open. As soon as I stopped, parked the bike, there was an almighty sting on my chest, and this massive bee had got inside my jacket and decided that it didn't like me. So anyway, so I'm dealing with this bee sting, which was very sore. And the first thing I did, so I got a seat in this sort of restaurant and ordered a bottle of cold fizzy water from the waitress. And so she arrived and I threw it over myself. And I'm sure she thought, mad Englishman, what are you doing? Because I was trying to calm the sting there. Anyway, so I had lunch, got back on the bike, and I'd literally been going for about 2 or 3 minutes, just heading off out of town, very steady speed. And I came on a roundabout. It was only a small roundabout. And suddenly the bike went. I mean, it just front went away from me. I'm on the ground. The bike is sliding away. I've got a tracker on the bike, which allows me to see exactly where I was and what speed I was doing at any one time. And don't tell the police about that. But I was doing 19 kilometers an hour exactly when I hit this roundabout and came off. So I wasn't going very fast. But it just happened so quickly. It was unbelievable. Suddenly I'm on the ground, the bike's away, and what happened? And I eventually picked myself up, and a woman came in the car and stopped, and she flagged somebody else down, and then this chap who was a bit of a gym bunny turned up, all rippling biceps and pecs. He hauled the bike up, which is great because I couldn't do it. I mean, fully laden. This was the NT, so it's 238 kilos, 500 pounds plus. When it's not laden, when it's got fuel and all the kit on board, it's very heavy, and I couldn't lift it. And in any case, actually, I suddenly realised my chest was hurting. It turns out, actually, I'd broken 2 ribs in the crash.
How did you break your ribs? What did it hit?
Well, my mobile phone actually, which was in my pocket. So when I slid off the bike, the front had gone away and slid. When you lose the front wheel, there's no way you're going to get it back. Rear wheel, yes. Front wheel, no chance. No. So I was on the ground before I knew about it. And when I landed, I got my mobile phone in my left jacket pocket, and that I think was what smacked my ribs. The phone was fine. I wasn't. Anyway, right? The police came and the ambulance came. Very nice chaps. They had a good look over everything, and they decided that I was not drunk, was never drink and ride, and I'd been riding sensibly. The bike was a bit of a mess. The ambulance man came, gave me a good check over, said, "Well, I think you broke a couple of ribs, but not a lot you can do about it. Just take it steady." So after a bit of messing around and writing out police reports and all that sort of stuff, they let me on my way. But what had happened is when I looked, I couldn't work out why I'd suddenly skidded like that. And when I went for a walk on the roundabout, it was just on the outskirts of an industrial estate. And all of these lorries had obviously come out of there and scrubbed their tyres off on this very hot tarmac surface as they'd gone round the roundabout. So it was not really tarmac at all. It was basically a layer of rubber. And then just to add to the fun, there was a diesel spillage. So diesel and rubber and heat, not a good combination. And the sun was behind me, so I couldn't see any sheen on the road. Otherwise, I might have sort of picked up a warning sign. And so that was why I went down. Anyway, I eventually did get back on the bike, which fortunately was rideable. Although, as it transpires, there was £5,000 worth of damage done to it, and it was brand new. It was only a few months old. All down one side was completely scraped, bits hanging off it, bumps and bashes. But after I got back on it, I took these roundabouts in Spain very, very steadily. I mean, I rode around them at such a slow pace because I just lost my nerve a bit. You get it back. But it took me a wee while to just get the sort of flow again and to feel confident in going roundabouts. It was kind of strange. But I mean, I was lucky. No lasting damage. I couldn't really do any swimming for 6 weeks until the ribs healed. But that was one of the adventures on the way over to Spain. And then when Ralph and I had a few mishaps on the way up to Norway, we our first night on the continent, we'd gone to stay in my favourite old German city, Bremen, and we obviously, we're quite conscious of security. So we'd booked a hotel in the city, which had got a secure car park covered by CCTV. And I thought that was okay. And we were planning to camp in northern Norway because the distances are quite large. And the accommodation at that time in the year, because it's still relatively early in the season, wasn't always open. We thought it'd be fun and practical to camp. So we stashed all our camping gear on board the bike or bikes. And foolishly, instead of doing the sensible thing and taking it off at night, we left it on, securely locked to the bikes, we thought. But we'd taken all the other luggage out of the panniers up to our room. Anyway, came down the next morning and I just went out to check on the bikes and I thought, hang on, something wrong here. Because there were straps and, rain gear strewn everywhere. And then, moments later, it dawned on me that all the camping gear had been nicked. And he'd lost his, I'd lost mine. Very foolish. So even though the car park was completely covered by CCTV, it hadn't stopped the thieves from nicking it. Anyway, obviously gutted. Ralph proved that he's the master of Zen. He was very sort of matter of fact about it, really. Well, at least we got the bikes and we got the panniers in one piece and we can replace camping gear, which was entirely true. Although he's glass half full, I'm slightly half empty. I was a bit more annoyed about it, partly because I was annoyed at myself for being such an idiot. But we went. So we had a happy morning in the police station, which is, gave me an opportunity to practice my German. So there are some silver linings. So we translating all these camping words, Zelt, tent, sleeping bag, Schlafsack, all that stuff for the report. And the police said, look, it would have probably been taken somebody who's on drugs. It would have been, sold or whatever. You'll never see it again. And I kind of thought, well, even if I do see it again, I'm not sure I necessarily want to. So we then, exactly. When we had to then change all of our plans. So we decided we weren't going to go and buy new camping gear. We'd find other accommodation, which in the end turned out to be great because we were forced to go and stay in wonderful places like Råbo, which are these wonderful fishermen's huts dotted all around the coastline, which are great and very couchful, which we wouldn't have stayed in otherwise. So, again, worked out well.
So in a way, it's kind of like, in hindsight, it's kind of nice that they stole your stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's one way of thinking about it. I'm not sure I'd put it that way, really.
Right. But no, I understand what you're saying, though. I mean, you can look at some good that comes out of it. You got to experience something that you wouldn't otherwise have experienced. But I mean, you would have got something out of the camping too. So it's one of those things that it can't be. It's not necessarily better, but it's different.
It's different, And of course, it was a story. And, in the end, when you stop to think about it, this is what travel and adventure is about. If it was all predictable, it'd be a bit boring, really. So that works out okay.
And you say that, but I was thinking about the story you just told before about going around the roundabout and crashing your bike and doing all the damage to it. And I'm thinking, okay, so that was a moment of, adventure, quote unquote, something that happened that you didn't expect. What did you get from that? Anything good?
From the crash?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say I got a tidied up bike, but not really, because it was tidy anyway. Really, I think. Well, I got a sense that I learned a lesson. That stuff can happen at any moment, and so you've got to be particularly careful. And I think it probably sharpened up my perception of road hazards a bit. I think it also gave me a sense of self-reliance, because it wasn't a particular. I mean, I was very fortunate. It could be a lot worse, but it wasn't on your own. It was slightly difficult to deal with, but I managed and I carried on. The plans, such as they were, didn't change. Everything else worked out okay afterwards. So I think I learned a bit about resilience and self-reliance from that particular incident. But I think it also influenced my thinking, and probably that of Judith as well, when it came to the Norway bit, which was that she said, look, you're going that far in some areas which are probably even more remote and deserted, it'd be better if you were going with somebody rather than going on your own. And it'd be hard to argue with that. So I kind of gained a sense of riding with a buddy being a good thing to do as well.
You wrote a book about some of the adventure that we're talking about, this 7,000 mile European odyssey called North to Norway. Why'd you write the book?
Well, I'd been writing a blog for a while. I've got a blog on Substack, and I enjoy writing. It's a pastime. It's something that I think I can do, and it's just fun to put my adventures down. I was going to say on paper, but you know what I mean, on the computer, and illustrate them and share them with people. I mean, if people read them and enjoy them, that's great. But actually, primarily, I'm doing it for my own sake. It's just fun to write these things down. And then out of that, actually sprang the idea that, well, maybe there is a bit of a book in here. And I'd written the blog about the Norwegian trip, but I hadn't actually written anything about Spain. So actually, I had to go and sort of write all of that up again, and then put the two parts together to make the book. And when I decided I was going to be quite serious about writing a book, I found an editor, a guy called Alan Whelan, who's a motorcycle author himself. He's got several books out about motorcycling in Africa, which I'd read and enjoyed, and I thought he would be the kind of guy who could really help me produce a book that was worth reading. And it took me a year to do. I'd like to say I loved the process. Actually, jolly hard work. I found it tough, especially when I sent my first manuscript off to Alan, thinking, what he'll find a few typos and maybe a bit of grammar here and there, but it'll all be okay. And it came 200 pages of notes came back. Oh my goodness, what have I done? Anyway, so yeah. That grounded
so
me.
The moral to the story is don't hire an editor.
Well, yeah, don't hire an editor, I guess, if you just want to get it done. But I think, to be fair, and he was great. If you want to produce something that you feel is worth reading and you can be proud of, then you hire an editor, and you've got to listen to what the editor says and go with them. But we got there, and I'm really pleased with it. It's great, and actually, it's given me the appetite now to write another book at some point, because that was the 2 points, north and south, and I think there's a story in the other bit, which is the west and the east. So I don't know what the title's going to be, East to Estonia or whatever, but my plan is to go and do that eastern point in Finland, and then come down through the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, northern Germany, and then back to the UK, and that will be a big trip. And as I say, I don't think anyone's done it, so I think there is a story there, maybe a second book. But I enjoyed the process, and it was fun. It's a different technique from writing the blog. You have to be much more discursive, more characterization. And I enjoyed writing the dialogue as well. I'd fortunately kept very good notes in a variety of different formats, and I'd recorded some conversations between Ralph and I. So, I got really good source material, which I was able to go back to for the writing. It was fun. I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, but I was going to say, the thing that I really love about these style books, I see two things with it. It gives a sort of a snapshot in time. So 20, 30 years down the road, people will be able to go back and read your book, and hopefully it'll still be in print or still be available. And they can look back and they can read what it was like to adventure some of these places, or ride through some of these places at that time. And the other thing it does for you, even in contemporary times, is it gives us an escape through somebody else's story, right? As cliched as it sounds, it's just nice to be able to sit at home and pick up something and follow somebody's journey through somewhere that you may never go yourself. You might be interested, you may not. I think those two things are really important with books. So it's well worth the time that it takes, I think, that you put into writing it.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I've read so many really good travel books, not just about motorcycling, but other forms of travel, and I love reading them. And it's also a very personal thing, because I've got 4 grandchildren, and I'd like to think that at some point, they're still only young, but at some point they'll perhaps pick up North to Norway and say, "Wow, did Pops actually do that?" And nice to think I might leave that legacy for them.
Oh, for sure. And maybe inspire them along with everybody else who reads it. I mean, this stuff is always inspirational. You think, if somebody else did it, I can do it. But especially your grandkids. Wow, that's great.
Absolutely. Although I'm not sure their mums and dads are going to be too keen on them doing it by motorbike. But, whatever. Each to their own.
Well, that's the thing. But that is the allure as well, is that it's a motorcycle.
It is. Well, it's that grey zone, isn't it? It is that grey zone. Yep. There's a risk to everything. There is a risk to that, but actually,
absolutely,
I think it's worth it.
Hey, Stephen, where does somebody get the book if they want to buy it?
It's available on Amazon. I think you can get it pretty well everywhere. It's certainly available in the US. And a friend of mine who lives in New York, he said he'd seen it on Barnes and Noble as well. So it's available online. You can get it. You can get it in paperback form and on Kindle as well.
North to Norway by Stephen Oliver. Stephen, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really enjoyed that.
Jim, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
I was speaking with Stephen Oliver from his vacation home in Spain. Now, Stephen's book is called North to Norway, Europe South to North by Motorbike. You can find that on Amazon. By the way, when you're giving it a review on Amazon, put in there that you heard about it here on Adventure Rider Radio. And I just looked at it, and it's got great ratings. Stephen Oliver, and the book is called North to Norway.
Yeah, I just want to remind you that this episode has been brought to you by Green Chili Adventure Gear, greenchiliadv.com, Motobreeze Chain Oiler at motobreeze.com, and Best Rest Products at cyclepump.com. And we'd really appreciate it if anytime you're dealing with these companies, anytime email or otherwise, let them know you heard them here on Adventure Rider Radio.
Well, that about wraps up another episode of Adventure Rider Radio, and we sure hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we did making it. Special thanks, of course, to our producer, Elizabeth Martin. And I just want to say the show is built on a model of advertising and listener support. We'd really appreciate it if you'd drop by and consider supporting the show. Now, if you don't like hearing ads, if you support through our Patreon option, then you can get the ad-free version every week. So if that's something you don't want to hear, then that's a great option for you. But there's so many ways you can do it, and we would really appreciate it, especially nowadays, if you'd get behind the show and support the show financially with some amount, any amount at all. And the other thing you can do for us is help spread the word. So give us a 5-star rating, hoping it's going to be a 5-star rating, wherever you're finding your podcast, whether it's iTunes or Spotify, wherever it is. That helps other people find the show. Share it on social media, post about it on your blog. Anything like that helps people find the show. And nowadays, there's so much noise on the internet, it's very difficult to find things, when you go to search for things. So if you could do that for us, we would really appreciate it. That would really help things out. So to support the show, just drop by our website, adventureriderradio.com, and click on support. All the information is there. Well, now it's time to get out there and ride your bike if you can. And I got to say it, where I am, it's getting close to ride season, and I'm very excited about this. My name is Jim Martin. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week.
Hello, here's Herbert Schwartz, and you're listening to Adventure Rider Radio.